So you have first start with the Jewish eschatology. And the Jews believe that they are the chosen people and they are God's, the Yahweh's favorite people. And the highlight or the apex of their civilization was King David's kingdom, the Davidic kingdom, and King Solomon. Okay, and this was when King Solomon built Solomon's temple, which was a house of God. And this was where Yahweh lived to be with his people. But unfortunately, the Jewish people were not loyal. They were unfaithful. So they started to marry foreign women, which brought in foreign gods. And then Yahweh became annoyed, angry at the infidelity of the Jews. So he left. And this allowed invaders, such as the Babylonians and Assyrians, to conquer Jerusalem. And eventually, this led to the Jewish diaspora, the scattering of the Jews. But even in the diaspora, they longed to return to Jerusalem to be reunited with their God. And in the Jewish tradition, what the rabbis tell the Jewish people is, when God is ready, when the Jewish people are ready for this reunion, the Messiah will come. The Messiah will lead the Jewish people back to the Promised Land. He will build the nation of Israel, and he will summon the diaspora to return to Israel, and he will build the third temple so that God will come. Eventually, he will face his enemies in the war of Gog and Magog, but he will triumph, and this will usher in the Messianic age. So, as Jewish people, our main responsibility is to reflect deeply on who we are, engage in spiritual alchemy, and once we engage in a long process of redemption, and once our hearts open up to God, then God will send us Messiah. So be a good person and wait and be patient, okay? So that's the standard mainstream Jewish understanding. But then you have these extremists who believe that is not God's intention. God's intention is for the Jews to prove that they love God and they desire reunion with God. And so it must be the Jews to act out first before God sends his Messiah. And that means you must first resurrect, reconstitute the nation of Israel. You must build the third temple. You must fight the war of Gog and Magog. And when the Jews have done all they can, but the entire world seems to have united against Jews, because that's what the world does, actually, unite against Jews. And when God sees that his people are in most desperate need, but he sees that his people have redeemed themselves, have repented, and yearn for reunion with God, then God will intervene and set the world right. And that is when the Messianic age will occur. But you must first make the sacrifice necessary in order to welcome the Messiah and the coming of Yahweh. Okay? So you can see how in the first iteration, yeah, it's interesting. But in the second iteration, there's sort of a passion, an energy, an excitement to it, where it's just like, wow, this is grand historical script being played out. It's all part of God's divine plan. And I can play my part in achieving this divine plan. So why shouldn't I? If I'm truly faithful, if I truly believe in God, if I want to prove myself worthy, shouldn't I do my part to achieve this plan? Okay? So does the Jewish eschatology make sense to you?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I do want to clarify for people that you're not saying that these eschatologies are necessarily real. You're saying that this is what the people believe, so it changes the way that they act, and that's how you use it to predict the future. Do you think it's important for people to understand the law of eschatological convergence to understand how you predict the future?
Sure. Okay. So there's the different eschatologies, okay? So I just mentioned the Jewish eschatology, but there are others. There's the Orthodox eschatology. There's the Catholic one. There's the Protestant one, the Christian Zionist one. There's the Mormon one, okay? There's a Freemason one. So there are all these different eschatologies out there. And what's really interesting is at certain points, they converge together, meaning they align at certain points, meaning that these are different religious traditions. Again, we're talking only about a minority, these extremists, right? Maybe 1% of the entire cohort, okay? But these are the most energetic. They're the most unified. They're the most determined, right? And if they're working together to achieve a certain script, and if the script is similar at certain points, then you can be certain or confident that these things will turn out. Because at the end of the day, we're the players in this grand historical narrative. So what we do is what determines the history. So if you just look at certain convergence points, it's amazing how they align, okay? So one major convergence point is the reconstitution of the nation of Israel. This happened in 1948. Then another convergence point is war and chaos in the Middle East, which is happening right now. Another convergence point is the building of the third temple. And this is problematic because right now, the Al-Aqsa mosque, which is the third holiest site in the Muslim world, it actually sits on where the third temple should be. And so you need to destroy the third holiest site in the Islamic world in order to build your third temple.
Is that in Jerusalem?
It is. It's all in Jerusalem. Yes. Yes. And so, if the Al-Aqsa Mosque would be destroyed, this would trigger a religious war. But again, if these eschatologies are really powerful and true, they all agree there will be a religious war in the Middle East, which will lead eventually to the war of Gog and Magog, which is also what they agree on. They also agree, and this is really interesting, is that America will not be part of this narrative, right? America does not participate in the Middle East. So, in other words, what they all believe is that America will lose this war against Iran and retreat back to North America and be engulfed in civil war. That's what they all believe. They also believe that China will not participate in the Middle East affairs, and China will probably retreat also into its own borders and turtle up. Yeah, so you have this convergence, and that's how I'm able to make these predictions because, well, if they want to behave in this way, and they're powerful people, well, they'll probably succeed.
You made a series of predictions, and I have some dates here. What's your prediction for 2027?
Sure. Okay, so let's look at some major events that are happening right now. Okay, so you've got this war in Iran that seems to be escalating day by day. You have the midterms coming up in November, and people expect the Democrats to sweep the House, in which case they will probably impeach Donald Trump. And you also have basically global economic collapse because the Iranians have closed the Strait of Hormuz. And so fertilizer and oil, LNG, are not able to be transported around the world. So the Middle East provides about 20% of the world's oil supply. And it's also high quality that the rest of the world can't actually replicate. So these are all very pressing issues right now, right? So my prediction for how things will unfold is that, number one, I think this war between the United States and Iran will only escalate. There can be no off-ramp because, first of all, Donald Trump sees this war in Iran as crucial in achieving his Messianic mission, which we talked about earlier. The military-industrial complex, Pentagon, the military, once they get into a war, they don't back out. It's human nature, right? Where it's some cost fallacy, where you've already invested so much into this war, and you're not gonna say, you know what, I've lost enough, I'm gonna go home, right? It's like going to a casino and you've lost $1 million. You're not gonna go home after losing $1 million. You're like, no. My luck will turn around, right? And also, like, if I go home, my wife is gonna shout at me for the rest of my life. So screw that. I'm gonna stay here, right? So sunk cost fallacy, mission creep. The Pentagon will not abandon this war. It will only escalate. You've got tens of thousands of troops being transported to the Middle East anyway, right? So all the ingredients are in place for major escalation. Okay, so you'll see a ground invasion of Iran, in which case it's gonna be a quagmire. America's gonna be stuck there for 4 years, I think, is optimistic. 4 years is optimistic, possibly 10, 20 years. Okay, so that's one prediction. Another prediction is that the midterms will not go the way people expect them to go. I'm not saying they'll be canceled, but what I'm saying is that right now, Donald Trump and the Republicans are trying to pass something called the Save America Act,
Right.
which is to say that they want voter ID. Now, the Democrats are saying that voter ID is akin to voter suppression. And the reason why is if you have voter ID laws, then you need ICE officers in the polling stations. And we know what ICE is like, right? So we can imagine that there'll be intimidation. There'll be some fraud going on in November. There may also be a cancellation of certain elections. I don't know how the midterms will turn out, but what I will say is that it's almost insignificant how the midterms turn out, because it's possible the Republicans stay, they maintain a House and a Senate, in which case Donald Trump continues his war. It's also possible the Democrats put up people called the Blue Dogs, who are national security apparatus people who are Democratic. Okay, so these are people who are CIA, who are Pentagon, and they would support this war. So they come into office and they would impeach Donald Trump if he did not continue this war. Okay, but it's also possible the Democrats sweep and they impeach Donald Trump, and this won't change anything because he still has the power to fight this war to the bitter end. And if he gets impeached, you can imagine that he'd be even more determined to fight this war. So I don't know what the midterms will turn out, but I will say that it will not be the way people expect it to work out. I think there'll be a lot of surprises. And I will also say it won't change the trajectory of this war. I think the trajectory of this war is already set. Okay. I will also say that by 2027, you should have the framework for national draft already in place. It is possible they've already passed legislation to create the national draft, or it's possible that certain people have already been drafted. I think by 2027, ICE will be much more powerful than people imagine. I think they want to deploy the National Guard to all major cities in America because they're preparing for economic collapse, they're preparing for financial collapse, they're preparing for the national draft. They will need law enforcement and National Guard in all the major cities, especially in democratic cities like Los Angeles and Boston and Chicago, where they expect the resistance to be the greatest. By 2027, all the ingredients for civil war should already be in place. I don't mean actually, two militaries fighting each other, but I'm saying like nationwide discontent and riots and protests and insurgencies. Okay, so this is going to be low-level conflict, but it's going to be what the Civil War will look like for the next few years. The global economy should have collapsed by 2027. So JP Morgan has reports saying that the world will run out of oil by the end of this month.
And that's because of the closing of the Strait of Hormuz.
That's right, because of the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. But the problem of the world is that people are used to efficiency, which is to say getting resources as cheaply and as quickly as possible. And the entire world is structured around efficiency. And the problem, though, is that efficiency and resilience are at odds with each other. So the example is just-in-time inventory, right? So companies don't have inventory because they don't want to bear the cost of inventory. So they just use just-in-time um, supply chains, meaning like you will only keep this thing in place for a couple of days before you ship it to another place. But what happens if there's a chokehold, right, or on a supply network, like the Strait of Hormuz? Well, then your entire system implodes because there's not enough inventory to go around. People aren't stocked up on necessities, right? So this crisis that we're seeing in the global economy will only get worse. And it's going to extend to every aspect of life where you think, okay, well, I don't drive a car or I don't fly a plane for next year. Like, no. That's not how these things work, man. Cheap energy is the foundation of the entire modern global economy. So it's not just travel, it's also food, man. It's possible they have to start rationing food. So a few days ago, Prime Minister Albanese of Australia and Prime Minister Keir Starmer of the UK start to address their nations. And basically, their point is, and it's very subtle language, but their point is, buckle up, guys. Okay? Because right now it's going to be food shortages, but imagine if there are food rationing going on, right? So this is a world that's unimaginable for most people, but it's a world of limited resources. It's a world of resource conflict, and it's a world in transition of collapse. So buckle up.
Would you predict that by the end of 2027 will be the destruction of Al-Aqsa?
Yeah, okay. So let's go into what we know about Al-Aqsa so far. Okay, so there was a Jewish rabbi who's very well known in Israel, but last June, during the 12th Day War between Israel, the United States, and Iran, he said basically, wow, this war would be the perfect opportunity to stage a false flag operation where the Iranian missile is flying over Al-Aqsa Mosque. We demolish it and we blame it on the Iranians. Then the Persians and the Arabs would go to war against each other and we could laugh our heads off. What a great way to resolve the conflict in the Middle East. Okay, so that's one piece of evidence. Another piece of evidence is the idea of the red heifer. And so the Jews, the Messianic Jews, want to rebuild Solomon's temple, build a third temple. But to do so, you need to consecrate the ground. So you need to make a red heifer sacrifice. But according to the Bible, the red heifer has to be perfect. And so there's this guy, this farmer in Texas, who spent years and years, millions of dollars, genetically engineering perfect red heifers. Then he shipped them to Israel. And so once they have Al-Aqsa destroyed, they make the red heifer sacrifice and then build the third temple, okay? The third temple itself has already been designed and built brick by brick. There's something called the Temple Institute in Jerusalem, and they have built the third temple. And all they do is move the third temple from the current location to the Al-Aqsa Mosque location. So this can happen right away. Okay? That's another piece of evidence. Also, we know that there have been archaeological digs under the Al-Aqsa Mosque these past 2 years. So if you want to do a controlled demolition, right? Well, that's what you do. You pretend it's an archaeological dig. You implant explosives under the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and then you pretend it's an Iranian missile, and then you blow up the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and then problem solved, right? It's not, we didn't do it. It was the Iranians who blew it up. Then you had Netanyahu last week say that an Iranian missile was just so close to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And he said, oh, You know, it was so close, and there's a great danger that the Iranians will blow up all these holy sites, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Western Wall, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Iranians are that crazy, so watch out. It could happen. Okay, so you have all these things lined up, and like you have to believe that, given the fact that right now Israel is run by these religious fanatics, given the fact that for decades, these religious fanatics in America, the Christian Zionists, have been supporting Israel, and given the fact that this war provides perfect pretext and excuse to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque, they'll probably try something, okay? But when, I can't say. It could be 2027. It determines on how the war goes. And also, like, the thing about these religious people is they believe in astrology, they believe in numerology, okay? So if they were to do this, there has to be a ritual, and there has to be a astrological alignment.
Right.
Right? So they haven't planned it out, but like I don't have access to this information, so I can't tell you, but they probably haven't planned it out. And they'll probably enact a ritual involving a false flag in order to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That's my guess.
That part really fascinates me. And I think we'll touch into that later in the interview. But what would that trigger, theoretically, the destruction of Al-Aqsa Mosque?
Right, so I think they've already telegraphed the plan, which is like they'll pretend it's an Iranian missile.
Yeah.
And then they'll do a controlled demolition of the mosque, and they'll blame it on the Iranians. And at this point, the war will be so confusing because Americans have sent in ground troops, and the war is raging on multiple fronts, where the Iranians are also destroying the oil refineries, the desalination plants of the Middle East. The whole world, especially Africa, is in terrible economic is in a terrible economic situation. There might be a food shortage in Africa. There could be a famine in Africa. And so the entire world is sort of like distracted. Right? So then the Al-Aqsa Mosque is blown up, and like people are like, what? What was that? What is the Al-Aqsa Mosque? Right? Because like people don't have enough food to eat. There's rioting in the streets. The grocery stores are empty. Right? People aren't going to be like, okay, well, you know, I don't have a job and my bank account has gone to zero and there's no food and like everyone's fighting each other. Like who cares about the Al-Aqsa Mosque?
Right. Because it was an accidental destruction in theory. Do you think we're heading toward nuclear warfare?
I am convinced nuclear weapons will not be used in this war. And the reason why is, according to game theory, Iran, Israel, and the United States do not benefit at all from the use of tactical nuclear weapons. Okay, so let's go with Iran, okay? Iran could, in 3 weeks, build 10 nuclear devices because they have the uranium, and the technology to build a nuclear weapon is actually open source. You can actually go online and build and find this information, okay? It's not that hard. If Pakistan can build a nuclear weapon, so can Iran, okay? So, but Iran's not going to do that. And the reason why is that for them, it's very important to maintain the moral high ground. And also, the only way they can lose this war is if nukes start flying, right? So you have 10 nukes, okay, you might destroy Israel, but then America has thousands of nuclear weapons to destroy you, right? So that's not strategic. And the Iranians have demonstrated that they are very strategic and very thoughtful in their actions. They've shown a lot of restraint in this war so far. Okay, so Iran's not that interested in using nuclear weapons. They probably don't even want a nuclear weapon, okay? Israel is getting all at once, right? Because Israel is trying to achieve the Greater Israel Project. It's trying to control the Middle East. So it needs America and Iran to destroy each other. Right now, they're starting to target Iran's critical civilian infrastructure, including desalination plants, including power plants. In fact, Donald Trump has threatened to blow up every single power plant in Iran if he's losing this war. Recently, I think yesterday, really, the Americans blew up a civilian bridge. Okay, so as this war escalates, the Americans are going to blow up every single piece of critical civilian infrastructure in Iran, including bridges, power plants, reservoirs, desalination plants. So that's going to take, a few years for Iran to recover. So Iran's not going to be a threat to Israel in the long term. Okay, America will send in ground troops into Iran at some point to win this war, and it'll be a quagmire for the Americans. They might send 100,000, they might send 500,000, who knows? But regardless of how many they send in, they're still going to lose the war because Iran is much too big, and the Iranians are much too determined, right? So it'll be like another Vietnam, in which case the Americans are forced out of the Middle East. And CENTCOM, the entire American military infrastructure then goes to Israel, right? Israel now becomes the dominant power in the Middle East. So from Israel's perspective, you don't even want to win this war. You don't even want to participate in this war. You just want America and Iran to duke it out for as long as possible, right? So why use nuclear weapons? Okay? The United States is, if you're Donald Trump, you're trying to rebuild America, and you don't really care actually what happens in the Middle East. You win this war, great. You lose this war, I can deal with that. You care more about what happens in America. You care about using the national draft. You care about ICE. You care about election tampering in order to consolidate your power in America. That's the good thing about war. War drives political transformation. And so Peter Hegseth yesterday fired 3 top military generals. You can do that in a war because they're not obeying you. They're not following their orders, right? So war is a great mechanism of political transformation. And that's what Donald Trump is focused on, right? So you want to drag this war out as long as possible because that gives you more power, right? So there was a press conference between Vladimir Zelensky and Donald Trump. And basically a reporter asked Zelensky, hey, when are you going to retire, man? You've been president for how long? And Zelensky's like, well, we're in a war, so we've suspended the Constitution. And Donald Trump's like, you can actually do that? And Zelensky said to him, oh yeah, you like that, don't you? Right? So he's telegraphing to you his intentions. They're not joking here, right? So the longer this war drags on, the more that America is mired down in the Middle East, the more Donald Trump benefits politically and personally. So why would he use nuclear weapons?
Professor Zhang, a lot of what you predict is driven by economics. So before we get into your next major prediction, you said money is alchemy used by the elites to enslave us.
Sure.
Why do you think consumerism is the perfection of slavery, and why do you see money as alchemy?
Okay. All right. So this is a really complicated question, okay? So I want to introduce 2 philosophers to help us structure our discussion. The first is Immanuel Kant. What Immanuel Kant says is that there's no objective reality. Everything is a creation of our imagination, right? So he differentiates between noumena and phenomena. Noumena are the things in themselves. The phenomena are the things to us. And so what we do every day is we participate in reality. We create reality because we filter reality using time and space. So time and space exists to us. They are what is called the ego. But time and space don't actually exist outside of us. And so that's a really important idea to understand, that reality is a hallucination. It's a collective creation. So whatever we imagine reality to be, reality becomes. Okay, so that's the first idea. Second idea is Plato's cave. So in his book, The Republic, Plato writes about the allegory of the cave. So imagine a cavern, and everyone, about 1 million people, are living there. They're all lined up one by one, staring at a wall. Okay, and they're chained to this wall, and their necks are shackled down. So they can't even move their necks to look around them. They can only stare directly into the wall. And behind them are some people, they, okay? Plato never clarifies who they are. Doesn't really matter who they are. Okay? But what they do is there's a fire behind them, and they take puppets, and they reflect these puppets onto the wall. And so the only thing we can see is the wall, right? So we see these shadows, and we think that this is reality itself. Okay, we know better. You and I know better, but the people inside the cave, because they've never been outside, they've never seen sunlight, they don't understand the concept of shadows. So they think these shadows are reality itself. And so what they do is they give names to these shadows. They create stories out of these shadows. They create a religion out of these shadows. So what these shadows are a way to structure and direct and focus our attention. And in our world, that's what money is. Okay? Money is alchemy. It doesn't exist outside of us. It's only because we believe it has value, it has value.
Hmm.
So now the question is, how did we get to this system? How was this system created? Well, believe it or not, but for the longest time, money was not an issue for people. So for example, let's go to the Vikings. If you're a Viking, what you did was you spent most of your time farming or fishing, but now and then you and your mates got together and you go and raided an Irish village or an English village for fun, okay? And you would target monasteries, because in monasteries there was a lot of gold. They would print books, and then the book covers would have a lot of gold, especially Bibles. And then they would take this gold and maybe sell it. They might capture some slaves, and then they would sell it to the Ottomans or the Byzantines, whoever, okay? And so they would make a lot of money in these raids. The moment they got back home, they spent all this money on a feast for the community. And that's like literally how people spent their money. They didn't save it because there was no point,
Right.
right? I mean, you could save your money by digging a hole and putting all the gold in the ground, but why would you do that? That was pointless. What you cared about was your reputation among your peers. What you cared about was a community. What you cared about was leaving a legacy, a memory. And then so the memory was not money. The memory was the stories. And that's why they went and raided these Irish villages and these British villages. Not because they wanted the gold. The gold was useful, but what was more useful to them was the stories that they could tell their friends about how they went over and killed a lot of people and did all these amazing things. That's what their social currency was, right? What they want to do was like sit in their longhouses in the cold of winter, and there's a fire, and they would tell each other these stories of, this great hero who went to Iceland and founded the colony there, and then he died for some silly reason. Okay, but they had all these great stories, and we still have them today. The sagas, right? The Norse sagas, and they're wonderful stories, and that's how most people live their lives in human history. This changed at a very particular time in human history. And the year is 1694. Okay, 1694. The reason why is the Bank of England was chartered in England at this time. 1688 is something called the Glorious Revolution. So think of the Glorious Revolution as a marriage between two Protestant empires, the British and the Dutch Republic. And at this time in history, the Dutch Republic were the wealthiest people in the world because they controlled the spice trade in the Far East. So their ships went to the Far East, collected spice, and then sold it throughout Europe. And spice at this time in history was the most valuable commodity in the world because it made your food taste better, right? You couldn't actually use gold, but you could use spices. So spices were the most valuable commodity in the world, especially from the Far East. Cinnamon, nutmeg, peppercorn, these things. The problem with the Dutch Republic is that it was inland. And so the Catholic Empire, the Catholic Church, the Spanish would come and conquer you, right? So there's real anxiety where they were generating so much wealth, but they had to protect this wealth. So they decided like the best place to put your wealth was an island somewhere that no one can invade. And that was, of course, England. So you had this marriage between England and the Dutch Republic. And now the question then is, okay, you have all this wealth generated by the Dutch, but how do you use it? How do you store it? How do you make more wealth creation, okay? And wait, sorry, I missed a very important point. Before, no one cared about wealth creation. There was no point. But suddenly the Dutch cared about wealth creation. And the reason why is They were Calvinists. Okay, so before the Protestant Reformation, everyone was a Catholic in Europe, and they believed that if I do good works, if I obey the church, I would go to heaven. So it's called just justification by works. If I just obey the Catholic Church, I could go to heaven. But over time, the Catholic Church started to abuse this privilege. It became very corrupt. It started to sell privileges to people. You know, if you were like a terrible, terrible aristocrat, you committed all sorts of sins, but you had a lot of money, the Catholic Church would be like, oh, that's fine. We'll forgive you.
And that's indulgences?
Exactly. The word is indulgence. That is correct. And the idea of indulgence is that you don't go to hell, you go to purgatory. And then you go to heaven. Because technically, you know, if you've done all this evil in the world, we should go to hell, okay? But if you paid the Catholic Church enough money, the indulgence, then you could go to purgatory and shorten your stay there. And in order to build these monumental churches like St. Peter's Basilica, the church was selling indulgences left and right to anyone, okay? So it's this massive corruption scam. And so obviously a lot of people would be very angry at this. And so people like Martin Luther and John Calvin, they started to question the authority of the church. And their main dispute, theological dispute, is you shouldn't be able to go to heaven just because you have money or because you bribe the priest. You should go to heaven because you have faith. But then the question then is like, how do you prove you have faith? And so John Calvin proposed the idea of double predestination. And the idea of double predestination is that at the beginning of time, okay, before God created anything, he determined who would go to heaven and who would go to hell. That's double predestination. So it didn't really matter if you obeyed the Catholic Church. It really didn't. The Catholic Church had no authority over you. So just ignore it and focus on your own internal salvation, right? But then the question is like, okay, then how do you know that you're one of the elect? Well, because you're successful in life, because of your wealth. So the more wealth you generate, the more you know that God favors you. But it was important not to spend this wealth, because then you show you are lustful, you are sinful, right? So this creates a very complex psychology where you are anxious to make as much money as possible, but you can't spend any of it because you don't want to show that you are sinful. And this is what led to the modern financial system, right? Because now, the Dutch Republic, everyone's putting their money in the bank, and so the Dutch Republic can now take this wealth and then invest it in other places, okay? And this is what leads to capitalism.
And why is wealth specifically like a sign that you're favored by God?
Right. So the question is, how do you prove you're one of the elect to yourself as well as to others? And the answer is through your success. Because at this time in history, everyone believes in God, and everyone believes that God is a source of your luck, right?
Right.
So if you have a good life, it means because you've been a pious person and God favors you. If you became a very wealthy person, that also shows you that God favors you, right? So wealth is the clearest indicator that to the community that you're a good person, right? Because before it was about storytelling, like how good of a storyteller were you? Now it's about wealth creation. How good of a businessman are you? Okay?
Right? Yeah. That makes sense to me. I think it's the concept of like resourcefulness, because the claim is that people throughout history didn't value money, but they always thought that having resources was a sign that you were favored by the gods. That's right. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Okay. And they define resources differently in different types.
Right.
Right. So the Dutch Republic has all this wealth. It can't spend it, but if it just leaves in the bank, all this gold, the Spanish are going to come and steal it, okay? So they transfer all this gold to England, which has a Royal Navy, and which can protect this gold, okay? But now the question then is, how do you ensure that this gold creates more wealth? Because it's important to create wealth to show you are part of the elect, right? So in 1694, they created something called the Bank of England. And the idea of the Bank of England is very simple. This would be a private bank, okay? Meaning like, if you put this gold into this bank, it's your gold. It's private. because you have to prove to yourself and to God that you are wealthy, right? And the deal is this: Parliament, the nation state, would borrow this money from you in order to finance wars. Because before, the relationship was, wars at this time was fought by mercenaries. So you need a lot of gold. You need a lot of capital. And so kings would borrow money from merchants usually. But the problem is that the king could die, the king could lose the war, or the king could just be like, I don't need to pay you back because I'm the king and you're not, right? So there's a real risk when you lend money to the king. But now that you lend money to Parliament, now it's safe because every person in the country is obligated to pay back the debt, regardless of how poor this nation becomes. As long as the nation state is still standing, as long as Parliament has authority, Parliament must pay you back. Okay, so the idea is the Bank of England has all this private wealth, and now it lends this money, what we call money printing, to Parliament in order for Parliament to finance public works projects, finance wars, finance everything. Okay? And this led to the creation of the British Empire. The problem with this is now Parliament needs to expand this wealth. And how do you do that? Well, you conquer other territories, right? You go start wars. And this is what led to the expansion of the British Empire. This is what led to the colonization of India. This is what led to the Opium Wars in China, where Britain forced drugs upon the Chinese population, because you're constantly looking for new markets in order to extract wealth. And this is what creates the idea of transnational capital. Okay, the first principle is the creation of wealth for the purpose of wealth creation. Okay, no other ends. It's not to make a better society. It's not to make a better world. It's not to improve the lot of humanity. It's just wealth creation, and that's all. And that's all they care about. And that's number one. Number two is it's transnational, meaning what they care most about is the liquid movement of capital around the world. So wherever there's an opportunity, they want to move that capital. So an example, of course, is America's Gilded Age, when America was rapidly industrializing. And so the City of London, the Bank of England, shifted a lot of transnational capital to America. The problem with America, though, is Americans hated the British at this time. And they hated transnational capital because they saw transnational capital as a source of all evil. So what they did, which was very clever, is they had agents that they handpicked in order to promote transnational capital in America. And these people are called John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, Commodore Vanderbilt. That's how they became very wealthy, right? Because think about this, how John D. Rockefeller came from nothing. And before he died, he monopolized the entire oil industry in America. How did he do that? Just do the math. It's impossible to monopolize an entire nation's oil. You can monopolize maybe Ohio or Florida. Sure, I can understand that. But when you monopolize the entire nation of America, that's ridiculous. Okay, and so I think the best logical explanation is that transnational capital recognizes his potential and backed him and gave him the financing to buy all his competitors, which makes the most logical sense, right? So that's what transnational capital does. It's only interested in wealth creation. It moves capital around from place to place. It has absolutely no loyalty to nation, and it believes in open borders. It believes in, it sees religion as a threat. It sees monarchies as a threat. And most people don't appreciate this, but transnational capital also financed the creation of Marxism, okay, in two aspects. The first aspect is, if you go and look at the life of Karl Marx, he was being bankrolled by Friedrich Engels. Friedrich Engels' father was an industrialist. So this is transnational capital. And why would they finance Karl Marx? And Karl Marx spent most of his life in Britain, right? So that's the first example. The second example is, if you look at the Bolsheviks, this was an extreme French political party in Russia that no one liked. Everyone thought these people are crazy, they're fanatics, but they had access to transnational capital. They were financed by Wall Street. And so during the Bolshevik Revolution, transnational capital was bankrolling them so that they could hire mercenaries to fight the war. They could bribe foreign governments not to intervene. They could pay off generals of the white armies, and that's how they won the war, with the help of transnational capital. So this dichotomy between capitalism and communism, it's all a false dialectic. It's meant to deceive you. Ultimately, what transnational capital is interested in is in seeking better investment opportunities. And Bolshevism made Russia a better investment opportunity for transnational capital, right? Because before, you had the Tsar, and you had the Orthodox Church, and both were opposed to transnational capital. They saw it as the Antichrist system. They still call it the Antichrist system.
Are you saying that communism was created by capitalists?
Yes, in order to pave the way for the infiltration of transnational capital into the world, right? Because who opposes money? Well, the king opposes transnational capital because he doesn't want the national sovereignty to be destroyed, right? Kings oppose transnational capital. Who else opposes transnational capital? Religious people, right? Because they see money as a source of all evil. Like, guys, let's not focus on making money. Let's just focus on praying to God, on being good people. Right? So with communism is is considered like the apex of the Enlightenment because it puts reason above everything else. It puts reason above God, country, and king. And no other philosophy did that before, right? So communism was crucial to the development and conquest of transnational capital.
Was it a controlled opposition for pretty much?
So
like it was made to be an enemy, so people promoted capitalism, which in turn promotes transnational capital.
Right. Okay. So what we need to understand is for transnational capital to win, it needs to create an entire worldview, an entire religion, an entire philosophy, so that it can infiltrate your mind, right? Because again, throughout most of human history, we didn't care about money. We cared about the community. We cared about our status in the community. So what transnational capital did was not only did it sponsor Marxism, but also sponsored other movements as well that were key to creating the world that we live in. Okay, so one person that they sponsored was John Locke, who proposed that private property is an intrinsic right given to you by God, and this was new at this time. At this time in history, people were pious and they didn't really care about private property. They cared about their faith. They cared about their community. They cared about their relationship with God. Now, John Locke is saying that private property is something given to you by God, and therefore it is protected by God. Another idea he promoted was something called empiricism, which is to say, like, you can only know things that you experience. And this is, again, a radically different concept from religion, which is you should feel God in you. And there are these spirits, holy spirits, around you. And John Locke's saying, no, guys, you're just hallucinating. You're delusional. Things only exist if you can experience them yourself. You can't just imagine things. You just can't believe these things. You have to be able to see these things, right? And this gives us David Hume, who promoted the idea of skepticism, which is to say, you know what? Even things you see may not be true, okay? You have to be skeptical about everything you believe because a lot of things you believe may just be a product of custom and memorization as opposed to reality itself. So he gives an example of, let's just say you've seen 10,000 white swans. Now you can induce the idea of induction that all swans are white. But is that really true? Well, it's not true because there are black swans. Not that many, but there are. Which is to say that all knowledge is based on induction, right? Because it's impossible for you to see all swans. If you've seen 10,000 swans and they're all white, you have to believe that all swans are white. But that's not true, right? So which is to say that your inductive ability is very limited. So David Hume is questioning the very project of philosophy. He's questioning the very project of enlightenment. and science. Okay, so that's it. Then you have Jeremy Bentham, and his idea is this: you have you can only know things that you experience, and even these things you experience, you cannot know to be true. So you can't actually appeal to universal principles. So what's the solution to this crisis? Utility. If it's useful to you, it must be good. What is useful? It gives you pleasure. It must be good. How do you know money creation is good? Because money creation, you can buy things, and buying these things gives you pleasure. Therefore, you know it's good. And then from Jeremy Bentham, you have John Stuart Mill, his protege. And then John Stuart Mill takes this idea of utilitarianism and applies it to all of society, which is to say that how can we judge whether or not social policy is good or not? Because it's useful, because it appeals to our sense of pleasure. Therefore, feminism is good because it brings women into society. Therefore, liberalism is good because it empowers the individual. And all these ideas together then form the framework for modern society, right? But again, what's important is these ideas are an outgrowth of transnational capital and its demand to control reality itself, our perception of reality itself, by making the world more materialistic, but by making money the main organizing principle of reality, whereas before it might have been God or love or family or community.